I had spent 17 years building walls inside myself, and I was proud of every stone. They called me the Iron Alpha of Dravenmore, not with warmth, not with the affection a pack reserves for a king they love. They said it the way men say a thing when they are afraid of it, quickly, quietly, and usually after I had already left the room. My wolves were loyal. My borders were unbroken. My great hall was full of banners and firelight and the smell of iron, and it had not known a Luna in all the years I had ruled it. I preferred it that way. That was what I told myself on the morning the border lords brought her. She arrived with 2 trunks, a satchel of dried herbs, and a composure so absolute I thought at first she was simply numb with cold. The delegation from the Marath lowlands had come with enough ceremony to make the occasion feel important. 3 lords in riding furs, a signed treaty rolled in a silver case, and a great deal of talk about goodwill between territories. I stood in the archway of the great hall and watched them cross my courtyard, and I counted the words I planned to say. Brief words, civil words. I had agreed to this arrangement for a single reason. Dravenmore's eastern pass needed Marath's neutrality, and a peace bride was the price the border lords had named. I had accepted because it was the least costly option, and I had told myself a dozen times that the woman in question would have her own rooms, her own quiet, and whatever courtesies I could offer a stranger. Nothing more was required of either of us. She stepped down from the carriage, and I looked at her the way I would look at anything delivered to my keep briefly, and with the intention of looking away. I did not look away. She was not what I expected. I cannot say precisely what I expected, something decorative perhaps, or something brittle, the kind of woman who arrives in a new place and immediately begins calculating her position in it. What I saw instead was a woman who looked at my courtyard, at my hall, at the gray sky pressing down on the northern ridge, and seemed to simply take it in. No calculation, no performance. She wore a wool traveling cloak in a shade of blue so faded it was almost gray, and her dark hair was pinned back simply, and she looked, the only word I can find for it now, years past, is quiet. Not frightened, not performing courage either. Simply quiet the way deep water is quiet. One of the border lords, a man named Reveth who had handled the treaty negotiations, and who wore his own self-importance like a second cloak, stepped forward and began the formal introduction. He said her name. Rend. I watched her lift her eyes to mine when he said it, and for one moment something shifted in the cold center of me, something small and deeply buried, and so unfamiliar I could not identify it. I filed it under tiredness and told myself to move on. "Welcome to Dravenmore," I said. My voice came out exactly as I intended, even brief, offering nothing and demanding nothing. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low and clear. She did not drop her eyes. That was all. I showed her to her rooms, assigned her a maid, and returned to the business of running a pack kingdom. I told myself the arrangement was already proceeding cleanly. What I did not account for was the wolves. Dravenmore kept 27 wolves in the outer yards, not tamed, precisely, but long bonded to the pack's bloodline, the way wolves bond when a keep has stood long enough and held enough of the same people within it. They were not gentle creatures. My head keeper, an older woman named Grith, had managed them for 11 years and bore the marks of it on her forearms. The wolves were loyal to the pack, to me in particular, and indifferent to everyone else, and new arrivals took months to earn even a passing tolerance from them. On the 3rd morning after Wren arrived, I came through the outer yard and found her sitting on the low stone bench near the wolf runs. She had not been invited there. Grith would have told her, as she told everyone, that the outer yard was not a place to linger. And yet there Wren was, sitting with her hands in her lap, doing nothing that I could see, simply being there in that quiet way of hers. And my largest wolf, a pale gray animal named Ash who had once broken a man's arm for moving too quickly past the gate, was lying 3 feet from her feet with his head on his paws. He was not asleep, he was watching her. I stopped walking. Wren turned at the sound of my boot on the stone and looked at me without alarm. "I hope this is allowed," she said. "I didn't touch him, I just came to sit. Grith said not to approach them, so I didn't." I looked at Ash. Ash looked at me with the flat, patient expression of an animal who finds the situation perfectly reasonable and cannot imagine why anyone would question it. "It's allowed," I said, and continued walking. I told myself it meant nothing. Ash was old, perhaps he was slowing down. By the end of the first week, 3 more wolves had adopted the habit of appearing near Wren at roughly the same times each day. By the end of the second, Grith came to me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between bewilderment and reluctant approval, and told me that the pack had stopped pressing at the gate on the days Wren came through the yard, which had been a problem for years. "They hear her step on the stone," Grith said. "They settle." I said nothing. I went back to my correspondence. But I had started to notice things. The way Wren moved through the keep, not quickly, not to make herself invisible, but with a quietness that was somehow distinct from smallness. The way she learned the names of my servants within the first few days and used them without prompting. The way she had turned her rooms into something that smelled of dried herbs and warm candle wax by the end of the first week, and how 2 of the younger pack members had begun to find reasons to walk past her door. She never demanded anything. She never complained. She asked once if she might have access to the kitchen garden to gather what she needed for her remedies, and when I said yes, she thanked me as though I had handed her something precious. She unsettled me, not with noise or drama, with her steady, quiet presence in my keep, which had not known steadiness of that particular kind in a very long time. The border lords visited again at the end of the first month to confirm the treaty terms. Riveth arrived with 2 of his people, and a satisfaction in his bearing that I did not like, the satisfaction of a man who has arranged something to his advantage and is pleased to see it holding. He asked after Wren in the tone of a man checking on a transaction. I answered him briefly. I did not like how the question was phrased. At the dinner that evening, Riveth sat across from Wren and talked at length about the Merath Lowlands trading interests, and I watched Wren listen, actually listen, not the performing attention of a woman managing a difficult guest, but real listening, and asked 2 questions so precise that Riveth blinked and took a moment before answering. The second question, about water rights along the pass, made the lord beside him turn with visible interest. She had heard something in what he said that all 3 of us had missed, and she named it without ceremony or self-congratulation. Riveth laughed. "A quick mind for a peace bride," he said. The words landed with the pleasantness of a stone dropped in cold water. Something shifted behind my eyes. Wren smiled at him with perfect composure. "A useful skill in a new keep," she said, and turned the conversation somewhere else so smoothly that only I noticed what had just happened. I noticed. I turned it over for the rest of the evening like a man working a sore tooth, trying to name what it was I felt, and coming back each time to the same unsatisfying answer. Nothing I had a name for yet. My war beast had been a problem for 3 years. Every alpha carries the wolf self, the deeper, older nature that exists beneath the man, that answers to blood and bond and territory. Most alphas learn to live with it in a kind of firm negotiation. Mine had never been quite so cooperative. I had been injured badly in a border dispute 6 years into my rule, and the healing had gone wrong in ways that healers explained in terms I had long since stopped listening to. The short version was this. My wolf self could be roused by threat or conflict into something I could not fully control, and the hours after a hard fight or a bad decision were hours I spent alone, in the stone chamber below the hall, until the worst of it had passed. My people knew. They had learned to give me space. They did not speak of it. Wren found out by accident, at the beginning of the second month, when a dispute over territory borders with the Western Pacts turned heated enough that I came back from the negotiations in a state I did not want anyone to see. I went straight to the lower chamber. I was not quiet about it on the way. She was in the corridor. Wrong place, wrong moment. I nearly ran her down at the turn, and the wolf in me surged with the sudden nearness of someone unexpected, and I stopped moving because that was the only thing I had that reliably worked. I expected her to press against the wall. People usually pressed against the wall. She stood where she was and looked at me. "How long does it usually take?" she asked. I stared at her. What? The worst of it. How long? No one had ever asked me that question. It was not the question anyone thought to ask. They were too busy moving away to think of anything else. "An hour," I said, "sometimes 2. She nodded. She said, "I'll bring something to the door. You don't have to open it, just if you want it." And then she stepped aside and let me pass, and I heard her footsteps going back up the corridor, quiet and unhurried, as if she had done something completely ordinary. An hour later, there was a soft knock and nothing else, and when I opened the door a crack, there was a clay cup of something warm on the floor outside, some preparation of hers, some healer's thing. and a small square of cloth with dried herbs folded into it, the kind she kept in her satchel. I sat with them in the dark and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like a person who was allowed to take up space in the world. She did not ask about it afterward. She did not bring it up. If I passed her in the corridor the next day, she met my eyes the same as always, level, quiet, offering nothing and withholding nothing. And I understood that she was a woman who understood the difference between what needed to be said and what needed only to be done. By the 3rd month, when the bad nights came, I found myself listening for her step in the corridor. Not hoping for it, merely listening. The way you listen for a sound you have decided you are not dependent on. The pack noticed. Of course they did. Wolves notice everything, and packs are made of wolves. The whispers started carefully, the way whispers do when people are not quite sure they are allowed to have the thought they are having, and then grew less careful as weeks became a month and then more. I heard it in fragments from Grith, from my second, a man named Aldrich, who came to me one afternoon and sat across my work table with the expression of a man who has something to say and has been practicing it. "The pack is talking," he said. "The pack always talks," I said. "About her," he said, "about what she might be." I looked at him. "The wolves choose her over Grith now," Aldrich said, "and Grith has been here 11 years. The pack's new litter, the pups from Ash's line, they follow her to her rooms in the evening, and she sends them back and they go because she tells them to, not because anyone else can make them. And you," he stopped. "Say it," I said. "You're different," he said. "In the bad hours, you've been you're managing it, which you haven't not like this in 3 years. He looked at me steadily. "Aldrich isn't a superstitious man, but the pack is asking whether the mate bond might already be." "No," I said. Aldrich held my gaze for a moment, then nodded and left. I sat at my work table and did not move for a long time. Outside the high window, the northern ridge caught the last of the afternoon light, and the keep was quiet the way it only was when everything in it had settled. I was not a man who believed in the mate bond as something that arrived on its own timetable and cared nothing for plans. I understood it as a fact of the wolf world the way I understood winter, real, non-negotiable, something you prepared for rather than chose. I had assumed, when I assumed about it at all, that it would arrive with more announcement, something unmistakable. Not this slow accumulation of small things, this growing sense that the shape of the keep had changed, and that she was the reason. I told myself it was gratitude. She had made herself useful, and I was grateful, and that was a reasonable and bounded thing to feel. I told myself that for 3 more weeks. Lord Fenwick arrived on a Tuesday, which was somehow apt. He was the second most powerful lord in the Merath lowlands, a man of considerable land and considerable opinion about how it should be managed, and he had come ostensibly to speak with me about the pass rights. What he actually wanted, I understood within the first quarter hour of meeting him, was to revisit the question of Wren. He was Reveth's superior, and he had not, apparently, been fully consulted on the specifics of the Peace Bride arrangement. He sat across from me in the great hall and explained, with the careful pleasantness of a man who is used to getting what he wants, and is not certain yet whether I am the sort of obstacle that requires charm or force, that the arrangement had been a temporary measure, a gesture of goodwill. Not, in his understanding, a permanent placement. "You'd like her returned," I said. "I'd like the arrangement reviewed," he said. "She's a useful woman. There are other alliances that might benefit from her presence." Something moved in me that I did not try to name. I looked at this lord across my table, with his rings and his careful language and his ledger view of a person's worth, and felt it build behind my ribs like pressure behind a dam. "The treaty is signed," I said. "Treaties can be renegotiated," he said. He smiled. "I'm sure Dravenmore has other ways to secure the pass rights. She was merely the simplest option." Merely, the word sat in the air between us like something with weight. "She stays," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Quiet in the way the keep is quiet when something in it has settled. Dravenmore does not return what it has received in good faith, and I would suggest, I added, that the manner in which this arrangement was framed to me and to her is something you consider carefully before the next negotiation. Fenwick looked at me for a moment. He was a man who read power in rooms, and something in what he read in that moment made him decide to move on. He left the next morning. I stood in the arch of the courtyard and watched the delegation ride out, and then I stood there a moment longer than necessary, and I did not go inside until I was certain what was moving in me was something I could manage. That evening, I found Wren in the kitchen garden. She was cutting back the last of the autumn herbs before the frost came, moving methodically along the low beds, her hands quick and sure. She did not look up when I came through the gate, and I stood for a moment and watched her work, and felt the pressure behind my ribs ease in a way it had not eased in a long time. "Fenwick has left," I said. "I know," she kept working, "then thank you. You knew what he wanted." I suspected it. Riveth's been worried about the water rights since the summer talks. Fenwick would want the simplest solution. She set down her cutting knife and looked up at me. The evening light was going, the cold coming up fast from the ridge, and her face in the gray-gold light was— I had been trying not to look at her face directly for several weeks, which I was aware was not a particularly dignified position for an alpha king. "He sees people as solutions to problems," she said. "Some men do." "I know some men like that," I said. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. She bent back to her work. I stayed in the kitchen garden longer than I had any practical reason to. I told myself I was checking the state of the frost covers on the lower beds. This was not true, and I was aware it was not true, and the awareness did it nothing to move me toward the gate. It was Aldrich who came to me, 2 weeks after Fenwick's visit, with the information that there were 3 new offers on the table from the Western Lords, good offers, strategic ones, and that each of them, in different language but with the same essential shape, involved Wren. "She has become notable," Aldrich said, which was his way of saying that the Pack world had begun to understand something that I was still, officially, refusing to name. I sat with the offers for an evening, and then sent them all back unsigned. Aldrich received this without comment. He was a good second. The night I finally made the decision I had been making for months without acknowledging it, it was not dramatic. There was no particular event. It was a quiet evening in the great hall, the fire low, most of the pack in their own quarters, a few of the older wolves stretched in front of the hearth. And Wren was sitting at the far end of the long table with her journal, writing something, and I was ostensibly reading correspondence. And the hall was full of the particular piece that I had come to understand was not a feature of the hall itself, but of her presence in it. I set down the correspondence. I looked at her. She did not look up, focused on whatever she was writing, and a small strand of dark hair had come loose from its pin and lay against her cheek, and she pushed it back absently without looking up, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me because I had been refusing to think it clearly for months, I do not want to send her away. I have never wanted to send her away. I want her here. I want her in this hall and in this keep, and in the life I have built here, not as a treaty concession, but as mine. The thought landed with the weight of something that had always been true, and had only just been allowed to surface. She looked up then, as if she felt the quality of the silence change. Our eyes met across the long table, and she held my gaze with that quiet steadiness of hers, and I watched something shift in her expression, something careful, something questioning, and I understood that she was waiting, that she had been, in her dignified and uncomplaining way, waiting for a long time, and that she would wait as long as was needed, because that was who she was, and also that she deserved better than being made to wait any longer. "Wren," I said. "Yes." I did not know how to say any of what I was thinking. I had 17 years of walls and the skills to maintain them and very little practice with anything else. "I should have," I started and stopped. She waited. "I should have said some weeks ago that Dravenmore is not," I tried again. "That this is not," I set down the letter entirely. "I would like you to stay," I said. "Not as a treaty concession, not as any kind of arrangement. I would like you to stay because you are—" The word I wanted kept sliding away. I reached for a simpler one. "Because the keep is different with you in it, because I am different, and because I—" It was then that the mate mark ignited. I had heard it described. Every wolf has, in the abstract, the way you know about something that belongs to the deep old world of your nature without having experienced it directly. I knew the theory. The mark appears when the bond is certain, when the soul claim is ready to be made, when the fated connection is no longer a possibility but a declaration. I had assumed it was gradual, something that built. It was not gradual. It came up my left wrist like fire that did not burn, a flare of gold-white light beneath the skin, spreading in the pattern of the bond mark, the old symbol of the claimed mate, absolute and undeniable. At the exact same moment, I heard Ren draw a sharp breath, and I looked up and saw the same light running up her wrist, and for a moment neither of us moved. The wolves in front of the hearth lifted their heads. Ash, who had been asleep, was on his feet. Ren looked from her wrist to my face. Her expression was, I do not have an adequate word for it. Stunned, yes, but beneath that, something wondering. Something that had perhaps suspected this for longer than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. "Oh," she said very quietly. "Yes," I said. I crossed the hall. I do not remember deciding to, I was simply moving, and then I was in front of her, and she was standing, and the mark on both our wrists was still bright in the dim hall, and I looked at her face for a long moment and thought of all the months of careful distance and felt it as the waste that it was. "I should have told you sooner," I said. "You didn't know," she said. "I knew something," I said. "I was choosing not to name it." She held my gaze. "So was I," she said. I took her hand, carefully, the way you hold something you are determined to keep, and felt the mark flare warm where our wrists met, and the wolves behind us huffed low in their throats, and Ash made the sound he made when he was satisfied with the arrangement of the world, which I had not heard him make in years. "I would like to do this correctly," I said. "There is a ceremony, a claiming before the pack. I would not." I stopped. "Only if you want it. If you would rather something quieter, I will arrange whatever." "No," she said. She looked at our joined hands and then up at me. "I want it. I want them to see." I understood what she meant. All the months of being received as a transaction, all the lords and their ledgers and their simplest options. All of it, she wanted them to see it overturned, and she was owed that, and I was going to give it to her. "Then they will see it," I said. The ceremony of claiming is one of the oldest traditions in the pack world. It takes place at the ceremony stone, in Dravenmore's case, a great flat-topped granite slab at the edge of the courtyard, used for this purpose since the keep was first built, and it requires the whole pack present, and witnesses from the allied territories, and the speaking of the bond words in the old tongue before all of them. I sent word to every pack in the 6 territories. I sent word to Merath. I sent it to Reveth and to Fenwick, and to every lord who had attended that first arrival in my courtyard, and seen a woman step down from a carriage and begin calculating how she could be moved again. They came, of course they came. A claiming ceremony at Dravenmore was not something the pack world ignored, and curiosity is a powerful motivator even for men with ledgers. Reveth arrived with a cautious expression. Fenwick arrived with an expression I had no difficulty reading. Several of the Western lords arrived with the calculating look of men who had sent offers and were now revising their estimates. The morning of the ceremony was cold and clear, the kind of northern morning that makes everything look very sharp and very true. The pack gathered in the courtyard before the ceremony stone, the wolves moving among them in their quiet way, and the allies arranged themselves along the edges, and I stood at the stone and waited. She came out through the hall door. I had expected, I am not sure what I had expected, something ceremonial, a concession to the occasion's gravity in the form of elaborate dress or studied presentation. What came through the door was simply Ren, in a deep green wool dress I had not seen before, her dark hair pinned up with the small care she always gave it, and her wrist visible where she had pushed back her sleeve, the mate mark clear and gold on her skin in the cold morning light. The courtyard was very quiet. She walked across it without hurrying. She did not look at the assembled lords. She did not look at Reveth or Fenwick or the calculating Western men. She looked at me and I looked at her, and the distance between us was 20 feet and then 10, and then she was standing in front of me and I was taking her hand, and the bond mark flared warm on both our wrists, and I thought, I should have done this the first morning, when she stepped down from the carriage and held her chin level and looked at my gray keep, as though she was already beginning to understand it. I said the bond words in the old tongue. I had always been better with actions than words, but these words I had rehearsed until they came without effort. The claim, the protection, the naming. I said her name with them, Ren, and the old tongue made it into something that meant the one the bond has chosen, and the one who is always chosen, and a third thing that does not have a clean translation but means, roughly, the one who was already mine before I had words for it. She said her part of the words back to me. Her voice was low and clear in the cold air, as it always was, and it did not shake. Ash stepped forward from the pack, which startled every lord in the yard and no one who knew him. He came to stand beside Ren with the slow, deliberate movement of an animal who is announcing something. And then the rest of the pack followed, not in a rush, in the orderly way of wolves who know exactly what they mean. And the courtyard filled with the soft sounds of the pack, acknowledging what they had understood for months. I looked at Reveth. He was watching Ren, and his expression had changed from calculation to something quieter. I looked at Fenwick. He looked away first. I covered Ren's hand with both of mine and held it there in the cold morning light, and felt the warm surety of the bond between us, and thought of a quiet woman sitting on a stone bench with her hands in her lap, asking nothing of a hostile old wolf, and receiving his trust anyway, and a clay cup on a cold floor in the dark, and an evening in a kitchen garden with the frost coming on, and all the careful months of a man choosing not to name the thing that was already true. What I did not expect, what none of the pack histories I had read quite prepared me for, was the ordinary, particular joy of it. I had understood the mate bond as something large and decisive, a matter of destiny working itself out through the lives of the people it chose. And it was that. But it was also this, waking to the sound of her moving through the keep in the early morning, her step familiar now and known. Finding that the kitchen staff had begun making the particular kind of bread she had mentioned liking, not because anyone ordered it, but because people do that. They make things for people they have decided they care about. The wolves bringing her things, stones they found notable, a bone from a favorable hunt, and her accepting these offerings with the seriousness they deserved. Ash took to sleeping across her door at night. I did not remark on this. He was an old wolf and had earned his opinions. The treaty with Merath held, and in the spring renegotiation Ren sat at my side at the table and asked her precise, hearing what is not said questions, and the water rights issue that had been festering for 2 seasons resolved in a single afternoon. Reveth left that meeting with the expression of a man reassessing several assumptions. He was not a bad man. I had decided merely one who had worked too long with lords who saw people as levers, and it had narrowed his view. Fenwick did not attend the spring talks. I was not sorry. There were things I told her that I had not told anyone, not in the confessing way, not the unburdening of a man who needs an audience, but in the slow, natural way that happens when you live beside someone who listens, really listens, and never uses what she knows to leverage anything. I told her about the border dispute that had gone wrong. I told her what the healers had said about the war beast and why I had stopped listening. She asked the questions she wanted to ask and held back the ones she didn't need to, and I came to understand that this, the specific quality of her attention, was a kind of gift that had nothing to do with treaty terms or peace brides or the calculations of men with ledgers. She told me about the lowland village she came from, the healer's work she had grown up alongside, the way she had understood from the time she was young that she was going to be useful in the world in a particular kind of way, quiet, unglamorous, present. "I never expected anything dramatic to happen to me," she said once, with a dryness that surprised me into a short laugh. "And yet," I said. "And yet," she said. She did not become someone other than who she was. That is the thing I want to be clear about, the thing I thought about most in the years after, when I looked at what the bond had made of my keep and my pack and my life. She did not become a performed Luna, a role she stepped into to please the ceremony or the pack. She remained herself, quiet, precise, genuinely interested in the things she was interested in, inclined to sit in the outer yard with the wolves in the mornings and to spend her afternoons in the kitchen garden and her evenings with her journal and whatever herbal project she had currently taken on. The pack loved her as she was. The wolves loved her as she was. I loved her as she was. My war beast had not required the lower chamber since the month she came to stay. I asked her about it once carefully because I was not certain I wanted the answer. "Is it you," I said, "or is it the bond?" She thought about it for a moment. "Does the distinction matter?" she said. It did not. She was right. It did not. In the 2nd year of our bonding, Aldrich came to me with news that Fenwick had attempted to arrange a new alliance with one of the northern packs, and that the arrangement had fallen through. The northern alpha had declined, citing, of all things, a conversation he had had with Ren at the spring treaty talks, in which she had apparently, in her quiet way, made very clear the value of an alliance with Dravenmore and the particular wisdom of not doing business with men who regarded people as interchangeable. Aldrich reported this with the careful, straight face of a man who is deeply pleased and knows it would not be appropriate to show it. I was appropriately straight-faced about it as well. "The Northern Alpha has asked," Aldrich added, whether Dravenmore would be willing to extend the treaty to cover the Spring Pass as well. We would, I said. He also asked, Aldrich said, whether Luna Wren would be present at the negotiations. She would be, I said. If she wanted to be, you'll have to ask her. She wanted to be, of course she did. The pack had been hers for a long time by then, since the morning of the claiming, really, though the wolves had understood it before that. The younger pups, born in the first spring after her arrival, had known no other Luna and treated her accordingly, with the particular combination of adoration and cheerful presumption that young wolves reserve for the person who has always been the center of their world. She was patient with them in a way that occasionally made me wonder if I was somewhat envious of a group of small wolves, which was not a thought I examined too closely. There was a morning in the third year, autumn again, the ridge going gold-brown above the keep, when I came into the outer yard and found her sitting on her usual bench, surrounded by the pack's 7 youngest wolves, all of whom were in varying states of sleep around and on top of her, and she was holding her journal and writing and occasionally reaching down to move a wolf that was impeding her pen and replacing it somewhere more convenient. With the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who has long since made her peace with her circumstances. She looked up when I came in, and I saw the expression on her face, that quiet warmth that was fully hers, that she had always had, and that I had been too busy maintaining my walls to see properly in the beginning. And I felt the mate mark warm on my wrist, not urgently the way it had the night it first ignited, but steadily the way a fire burns when it has found the right wood and means to go on burning for a long time. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. I sat down on the bench beside her, and a small wolf immediately redistributed itself across both our laps with the confidence of an animal who has decided this is where it belongs. And Wren gave me the dry sideways look she gave me when something was funny, and she did not want to be the one to say so. And I thought of a man in a stone corridor, trying to count the words he planned to say, and choosing instead to say the plainest true ones he had. She was here, the keep was full of her quietness. The wolves were piled around us in the warm autumn morning, and Ash was watching from the gate with his old flat satisfaction, and the northern ridge was gold above the walls, and I was, in the particular way of a man who has finally put down something very heavy he had been carrying for a long time, at peace. That was the life the bond built, out of a treaty and a carriage and a woman who stepped down from it without fanfare and looked at a cold gray keep and found what was worth tending in it. I had spent 17 years building walls, and I was proud of every stone. She did not take them down. She simply came to stand on the right side of them and stayed, and the walls stopped meaning what they used to mean. In the end, that was all it took.